I'll never forget the sound. It started as a faint knock, barely noticeable, then turned into a metallic scream that echoed down the street. Running a car for 7 days with no oil, it was part of an experiment, but the results were more catastrophic than we anticipated. From warning lights to the exact moment the engine gave out, we captured every detail. This story will make you think twice about skipping an oil change. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. When your car is low on oil, it doesn't quietly wait for something to go wrong. It starts signaling almost immediately. The first and often most overlooked clue is the oil pressure warning light. This small red or yellow emblem usually pops up on the dashboard, but many drivers either dismiss it as a minor electrical issue or don't act right away. During our experiment, the car was drained of all its oil and started up normally. However, within moments, the dashboard lit up like an urgent call for help. The oil pressure warning light came on, and the message was clear. The engine was already in trouble. What the warning light actually indicates is critical. Under normal conditions, oil circulates under pressure throughout the engine, creating a thin barrier between metal components that keeps them from grinding against each other. Without oil, that pressure drops sharply. In our case, within minutes of starting the engine, the oil pressure gauge plummeted to 0. This wasn't just a number. It was a glimpse of the engine's fight to stay lubricated. When that pressure drops, metal friction starts to build, and fast. Research shows that oil pressure isn't just about keeping things running smoothly. It directly impacts how the engine manages intense heat and motion. With every revolution of the crankshaft, pistons are moving up and down thousands of times per minute. During those first few minutes of running the oil-deprived engine, faint clicking sounds began to emerge. At first, they were barely audible, a soft, rhythmic pulse that could have been mistaken for normal engine noise. But a trained ear might recognize this as the sound of metal lifters working harder than they should. Think of it like removing the water from a slip and slide. Instead of a smooth glide, there's drag, friction, and an exhausting grind as the surface resists movement. Inside the engine, this process was beginning. Without that critical layer of oil, metal components started to come into direct contact. Friction wasn't just rising, it was starting to change the structure of these parts on a microscopic level. Engineers often explain this as the boundary layer disappearing, and without it, even tiny imperfections on the surface of the metal start to catch and grind. What was happening wasn't loud or dramatic, yet the engine still ran, but you could feel the hesitation building. A slight loss in power, a moment of sluggish response when the gas pedal was pressed, and an almost imperceptible vibration started to creep in. For the average driver, these might seem like quirks in performance rather than signs of a deepening problem. That's why those early hours of our test highlight how easily these warning signs can be missed. People often assume their car can simply last a little longer without oil, but they don't realize that unseen friction is already creating permanent damage. As the clicks grew into a more noticeable knock, the engine was signaling that stress was already taking its toll. What's especially alarming is how quickly this stress spreads. Without lubrication, even minor friction causes heat, and heat accelerates wear on every moving part. This interplay turns the engine into a pressure cooker of escalating problems, one scratch or grind rapidly worsening the next. But here's the part that really sticks. The early damage at this stage is the kind that can't be undone. A single drive on 0 oil begins scarring the surfaces of the engine's most important components. Those faint sounds are the first whispers of catastrophe. It's what makes ignoring that small warning light such a costly mistake. The first few hours were calm compared to what was coming next, but the engine wasn't waiting for anything. It was already heading down a steep slope of damage that no amount of repairs could fully reverse. What followed as the hours passed and the heat and friction grew would prove how quickly a problem like this spins out of control. The engine's subtle missteps were about to turn into something far more destructive. In the second phase of the experiment, things got serious and fast. Without oil to lubricate the engine, it only took a short time for temperatures to rise beyond normal levels. What you might not realize is how central oil is to regulating temperature inside an engine. It doesn't just keep everything moving smoothly, it also helps dissipate heat. Without it, the intense friction between metal parts created a perfect storm, rising heat, growing resistance, and eventually warping components. The sounds were the first obvious warning sign of escalating damage. During this stage, the faint clicks from earlier took on a new, harsher tone. Grinding noises began to dominate, the unmistakable sound of metal components, like pistons and bearings, rubbing directly against each other. It wasn't just unpleasant to hear, it reflected a much deeper issue. The lack of lubrication meant these parts, designed to glide effortlessly, were now grinding and catching. Every clunk represented another part being damaged, another piece wearing down. The engine had officially entered the danger zone. Why does friction cause so much havoc so quickly? It's not just about heat, it's about what that heat does to the materials inside the engine. Hot spots, areas where friction is concentrated, start to form on critical metal surfaces. These spots warp under extreme heat, changing their shape and compromising the precision these components rely on. The internal damage isn't always visible until close inspection, but the effects are undeniable. It's the kind of destruction that spreads like a ripple through the engine. Once one part fails, it places extra stress on everything else. The heat didn't just impact the metal components, it started breaking down the engine internally in other ways too. Extreme temperatures caused what little oil residue remained to degrade into sticky substances. Oxidation and thermal breakdown created sludge and varnish that clung to surfaces, further restricting movement and increasing friction. Tests show sludge buildup not only damages engine parts directly, but also blocks pathways for airflow and cooling, creating an even more intense cycle of overheating. Essentially, the engine was being attacked both mechanically and chemically at the same time. One of the earliest critical failures during this stage involved the rod bearings. These components play a crucial role in allowing smooth movement between the connecting rods and the crankshaft. Without oil, they became one of the first casualties, deforming and grinding themselves down to the point of being non-functional. As the rod bearings gave out, the crankshaft faced greater strain, which then transferred undue stress to the pistons and rods. That's when the knocking became a constant and much louder presence. Each knock wasn't just noise, it was another step closer to catastrophic failure. This domino effect couldn't be stopped. Once the bearings failed, the engine began to spiral into faster and more severe damage. Every part that compromised added stress to another, like the rods struggling under extra heat and force as the bearings deteriorated. This added stress caused new friction, generating additional hotspots and rapidly increasing the speed of destruction. What started as isolated damage began spreading through the system, leaving no part untouched by rising temperatures and grinding metal. Perhaps the most sobering part of this phase was that it wasn't gradual. The combination of heat and friction cascaded through the engine exponentially, pushing critical systems well beyond their limits. Even if the engine were stopped at this point, the damage was already irreversible. Warped metals, sludge deposits, and compromised bearings ensured that no repair could bring the engine back to its original state. The transformation into a ticking time bomb was complete, every part under ever-increasing strain. By now, the engine wasn't just struggling, it was fighting a losing battle. The escalating sounds, the rising vibrations, and the worsening performance were all clear signals that the worst was yet to come. The question wasn't if the engine would fail, but when and how violently. The final breakdown wasn't far off, and the dramatic end was just around the corner. When an engine reaches this stage, the heat alone is enough to obliterate any chances of recovery. Temperatures inside had climbed so high that internal parts began to warp, creating permanent deformations in the engine's most critical components. This warping made it impossible for the engine to remain operational, as precise measurements and fits are crucial for smooth functioning. Engineologists refer to this process as seizing, where the parts essentially weld themselves together due to the extreme conditions. As described in research, the engine's rotating and reciprocating components will stop rotating and reciprocating, leaving no hope for repair. At this stage, even attempting to rebuild the engine would likely cost more than outright replacing it. And then came the most dramatic end. With a deafening bang, the engine let out a final cry of defeat. The sound was like a small explosion as one of the rods punched through the engine block itself. This is a catastrophic failure, one that not only destroys the rod but also cracks the surrounding metal housing, rendering the engine completely useless. The car jolted, shuddered, and finally fell silent, grinding to a stop. That was it. The moment where metal could no longer move and the entire system seized. The destruction didn't leave a single usable component behind. When an engine ceases from running without oil, the cost is staggering. Research highlights that the engine is rendered useless, and replacing it often demands thousands of dollars, not including labor. It's why mechanics emphasize oil maintenance as non-negotiable. Even skipping one regular change can lead to cascading damage that multiplies exponentially, as the experiment demonstrated. The money saved by ignoring upkeep will never compare to the cost of total engine replacement. Running a car without oil isn't just risky, it's a guaranteed way to destroy your engine. The absence of oil triggers a cascade of damage, where friction and heat warp components, seize moving parts, and eventually render the engine irreparable. As one source states, once your engine runs out of oil, it will grind down and experience seizures. Regular oil changes aren't just about protecting performance. They're critical to preventing catastrophic failure. So ask yourself, is skipping an oil change or putting off maintenance really worth the cost of an entirely new engine? The smallest effort now can save thousands later.